Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Deborah Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
Well, Americans, you and I are gearing up to celebrate the 249th, can you believe it's been that long, 249th birthday of the United States of America. And this week we will focus on what President Franklin D Roosevelt, FDR, later called the pillars of universal rights, the four freedoms. Today our Morning Light panel will tackle the first one, the freedom of speech.
Very important. But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. Learn about hospital ships that help save and transform lives. Mercy Ships provides free, life-changing surgeries to children and adults all around the world.
I'm really excited about that.
It is. It's very exciting.
So it was January 1941, and President Franklin D Roosevelt went to Congress with a message against isolationism at home and dictatorship abroad. Many of the famous European capitals were falling to Adolf Hitler. Japan had already invaded China, and the America First movement was keeping the United States out of the war. FDR's Four Freedoms speech was his argument against neutrality for the idea that there were universal human rights.
Well, and on a yellow legal pad, FDR's speechwriter took dictation in longhand, adding a section known today as the Four Freedoms. The first is tested every day right here in America.
The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world.
President Roosevelt saw the rise of government censorship and the suppression of dissent by the Nazis in Imperial Japan as a threat to freedom everywhere.
It's interesting. He was really weaving a theme there that would define the character and the nature of our involvement in the war.
That's right.
But the freedom of speech presents a dilemma for those of us with dual citizenship. Now, two distinct identities as American citizens and as Christian citizens, citizens of heaven. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. But Scripture provides guardrails on what we say, how we say it, and even the intent of our speech. So how do American Christians balance the right to say anything to anyone at any time with Scripture's warning against harming one another with our speech? We'll take these hard questions to the Morning Light panel this morning. Dr. Dan Spanjer, Cynthia Lyons, and former Corrections Secretary and all-around good guy, John Wetzel. What do we say you do now?
I'm an unmercenary.
An unmercenary?
Yeah, or a nonprofit dude, similar. You know,
making a difference still.
Try to help.
No need for titles, right?
Other folks don't help.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff.
Dr. Spanjer, take us back to 1941 and why FDR felt compelled to outline these universal human rights. Was it not something that was part of kind of the language up until then?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, the Constitution certainly lays out these parameters around the federal government, right, what they can and can't do. But I think at a time when you see governments doing things like what you saw in Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, the idea is, are there more critical basic units to the human interactions with government and one another that you have to protect for everything else to work? Like, do you need an economy to work? You need morality in society to work? Are there certain, as you say, guardrails that need to be placed on government so that those things can function? And if those get removed, does human dignity get lost? Does the interactions and relationships we have with one another actually start to degrade? And I think he was trying to isolate four that you could get your mind around and say, yeah, we could fight for those four things and protect human dignity.
So speech, and the beauty of, I think, FDR's speech is that you can go to the FDR library and see the yellow legal pad where his speechwriter was dictating what was coming out of the president's mouth. And so what flows on the legal pad is what he said from the podium. Why was this the first one, freedom of speech? Why is it so critical?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, in 1940, he had actually delivered this when he was dedicating the library, his library. He actually came up with four originally, and it was not. Freedom of speech was not the first one. Interesting. No. He actually came up with freedom of information and press, and then later cobbled it together and changed it. But I think underlying it, if you're going to have a responsible government, people have to be able to speak out. If you're going to constrain, right, and I think this is where we get into the issue, and I think you've raised this tension between what does a Christian do in the situation? Freedom is not license. But you have to have a constraint on government for virtue to grow. You have to have a constraint on government so that people can actually develop their own courage and be virtuous and act properly. As soon as government comes into play and starts telling you what to do, virtue is no longer an issue. Now it's a matter of fear, obedience. You do what you're told to do. But you don't have the opportunity to actually develop what is self-control, self-constraint, and virtue. Require that kind of freedom.
Virtue. So in running prisons, where do you, as a dual citizen, as a Christian, and then someone who's operating in the world, how do you find where that line is for you about, I'm so angry, I have the right to say this online, in person, in a speech, but I say no because I'm constrained by another force?
Yeah, I always erred on the side of staff and folks who worked for me had the right to free speech, especially in their personal life. And frankly, I do think it's fascinating the way you described that. And I think it really, to me, it really scares me for some of the stuff I'm hearing today. When you think about this formation, this formative stuff, it's saying our founding fathers and our early presidents saying, wait, we need these things for this whole thing to work. And I felt that a lot. I've had some, in one case I defended, we had a staff member come with a rebel flag on their car. And I argued that to work, which isn't great, I didn't like it, but I was concerned about limiting that. I lost that argument to the administration, and they probably were correct on it. But I think it's really important that if there's a question, we err on the side of transparency, and freedom of speech is part of transparency to me.
Right. You work in school world. You work in an environment right now where citizens are charging the gates of the public school system because they find that there are things that are wrong about it. So they are running to the microphones at school board meetings. They are showing up in force, but they're not always constrained. They're fully flexing their ability to say what they want to say, and they're going to say it and in the way they want to say it. As a Christian, how do you see the role of Christians when they step to the microphone and engage being different from someone who does not have the Holy Spirit doing the governing, the self-governing?
Sure. Well, freedom of speech is just that. It doesn't then give us a right to incite things like violence. If someone at a school board meeting is going to step up and be that agitated about something that's going on, you don't know what's happening around them or us that could incite something as a result. So there is a barrier there.
People are coming in with all kinds of...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, everybody has a right to their forethought as well as their views on things, but it's how they approach it and how they say it. So I think when we walk into the school board meetings or whatever meetings it is, that's where, as the person at the podium, needs to make sure that, you know, what's the rule? Take a breath and 5 seconds before you open your mouth. Because being a Christian doesn't mean that I can't be angry about something. Being a Christian doesn't mean that I can't feel a certain way about it. But how then do I present those thoughts and feelings that are more Christian-like?
But part of, I think, what we're seeing is that they're not feeling heard. And they're
Correct.
seeing no evidence
Correct.
that what
'Cause there's
they're
not
saying,
changes. Correct.
what their needs are, and when they're expressing actual needs, that they're seeing government respond to it. So when people don't hear you, you yell louder.
Right.
And when they don't hear you, keep yelling louder until you start getting physical. We're seeing examples of this all over the place. Government has to listen. Implicit in this freedom of speech is a requirement to listen to what people are saying. And that used to be a very important part of government. And government is moving away from the needs of the people.
So government turns the channel and it's hearing static and not hearing people. Where does love come into play? How does love constrain or restrain our words?
Right. I remember it was Benjamin Franklin that said, you know, freedom, it is only virtuous people who are capable of freedom. Right? So freedom is not license, and freedom is a limitation on government. That's where freedom plays its largest role. It tells government you can't go any further. But then there's a citizen responsibility, right?
Sure.
That's not what's said. When you say freedom, it sounds like license. I can do whatever I want. No. What that means is the government won't intrude, but then you have a responsibility on your end to develop the kind of character, self-control, and discipline to say what needs to be said, to say it loudly when it needs to be loudly, to say it in a way that's loving and kind. And I think what's implicit in even the constitutional arrangement of the First Amendment is that you as a citizen are actually working hard to develop the kind of character and wisdom necessary to speak when it has to be spoken.
Okay, so take 30 seconds to talk about what is the character then of the citizen What makes a good citizen? On Independence Week, what would the founders have said makes a good citizen?
Well, you can go right to Washington for this, right? In his farewell address, if you don't have Christianity, don't plan to have a republic. You have to have the kind of character and education in your citizens where they know how to be self-controlled, they know how to value it's important, because the government is not going to step in and fix them. You have to take care of that. The government has a constraint, supposedly, and it's supposed to be sensitive and aware and actually listening. I think it's a great point. And I think when government doesn't, people lose that self-control. And the question is, where do we as Christians, when the government doesn't respond, how do we respond?
And again, we can talk about government. We can talk about, the bigness of where that umbrella lies. But, don't we always hit home on, as a 16-year-old, what are you saying in public that a 5-year-old is hearing?
Right.
Like, is that freedom of speech? But I think we have to become better models of what we're saying and how we're saying it.
Well, I think Washington, I love that focus from Washington. And I think what another way to translate that is a Christian, the expectation, the requirement for a Christian is that first you love God, and secondly, you love your neighbor before you love yourself. And so if that's the framing, so the assumption that underlies our Constitution is that we will focus on others first. That's the assumption. And so that's what they were operating under, and we've lost that and a bunch of other stuff. So we should not be surprised.
I want you to play historian here for the last 45 seconds and just give us, are you hopeful in this moment, knowing what politicians and citizens, how we are all not self-governing very well?
Right.
Are you hopeful that we can put it back in the constraints of the constitutional republic?
The historical record isn't great. We've hidden things. I think in the past we can see lots of examples where the country did not hold it together well, right, and did not actually act in the way you guys are describing. I don't think we've done it very well. So can culture turn it around is not a government question. And I think, John, you raise a good point. Cynthia, you've raised a good question, too. Are we as citizens in government working, I think, collaboratively in this? I don't think we are working collaboratively, right? I don't think we as citizens are stepping into the gap and acting the way we should, and government is not acting the way it should. And so what happens is one runs further out in response, and the other one runs further out in response, and we end up on two ends of the seesaw, very far apart from each other. And I think that's concerning. But I think it's the Christian, it's the church that needs to step into the gap and really take its commitment seriously.
That's the final word. I've been taking notes mentally, and I'll be rewatching this panel because I learned a lot. So thank you very, very much. Sure. Well, driven to provide hope and healing, 50% of the world's population lives near a coast. We'll learn how Mercy Ships is transforming and saving lives aboard floating hospitals. You're watching Morning Light right here on Lighthouse TV.
Welcome back. Globally, 5 million people lack access to safe surgery. Mercy Ships is a nonprofit that sends hospital ships to regions where resources are scarce, and health professionals provide free surgery and medical training. And that includes a couple with ties to Pennsylvania. Joining me is Joanna and Matthias Immendoerfer. Thank you so much for being with us. Absolutely. So tell us about Mercy Ships.
Mercy Ships is a faith-based charity that runs 2 hospital ships in sub-Saharan Africa, the Global Mercy and the Africa Mercy. And in sub-Saharan Africa, 9 out of 10 people don't have access to safe surgery. So thousands of people from over 60 countries volunteer every year on the ship, from a captain to a surgeon to IT professionals, and make this mission possible. And we've had the privilege of living on that ship for the last 9 months.
So tell us about where you have been the last 9 months, and talk to us more about the surgeries.
So we've been docked in Freetown, Sierra Leone for a 10-month field service. And we do surgeries, we do plastic surgery, reconstructive plastics, often for burn patients. We see a lot of that. We do maxillofacial surgeries, which are tumors on the head and the neck. We also do general surgeries for both pediatric and adult. We see a lot of hernias, often due to lack of nutrition. And we also do orthopedic surgeries for kids with bent legs, also due to a lack of nutrition. And lastly, we do some eye surgeries as well, removing cataracts.
So how does this work? That's just amazing. But I mean, how does it work? How do people know that this is happening?
Yeah. So long before the ship arrives in a certain country, there is a team that engages local healthcare authorities. They would educate patients and the population on what conditions can be treated. And then once the ship docks, it's a fully equipped hospital, right? It has preoperative screening, it has radiology, it has a rehab section, etc., etc. So my wife is actually one of the first touch points that a patient will have to check things like blood pressure and make sure they're fit for surgery. And then, they go through that whole process up until wound care and rehab, and then make sure they're safely discharged back.
And how do you share the gospel with them?
Yeah, I think there's kind of three main touch points. So we work also with day crew, which are local, in our case, Sierra Leoneans who come on the ship and help us translate and help us understand the culture that we're working with. So they're really our lifeline. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. And some of them are Christian, some of them are not. So that's one touch point of you're working alongside people. So it's sharing the gospel often without words with the people you work with, and then also with the patients. They come in, and I work in the preoperative team. So like Matthias said, one of the first touch points. And we start that journey by praying for those patients right away, by welcoming them in, trying to learn who they are, and just looking at them and loving them right from the beginning, not trying to see them for what their ailment is, but seeing them for just a loved person. And that's where it really begins. Yeah.
Wow, I'm sure this ministry is making a huge difference. Tell us about that.
So to me, one aspect of impact is numbers, right? But it's not everything. So in terms of numbers, there are a few thousand surgeries both ships can complete every year, and that's a huge number. But in the context of 17 million people dying from lack of access to surgery worldwide every year, it's a drop in the ocean, right? So to me, it's really seeing the gratitude in a patient's eye after the surgery, right? As you look at them, and there's just so much relief and gratitude that they can go home being able to walk normally, being able to see better again, being able to breathe normally. And that gratitude is better than any paycheck. And that's part of the rewarding things you get as you volunteer.
Wonderful. We do need to take a break, but we do have much more that we would like to talk to you about. So coming up, we will talk to Joanna and Matthias about their personal journeys and what led them to Mercy Ships. Stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back. We just heard about the mission of Mercy Ships, provide surgeries and medical training to those in need. Back with me, Joanna and Matthias Immendoerfer. Thanks again for being with us. Let's talk about your faith journey. Joanna, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home, I'm actually from Hummelstown area originally, and went to Messiah University, got my nursing degree there, and I would say right before going to university, I realized that my relationship with Jesus wasn't just for me. It was something I really wanted other people to experience too, that it could be transformative in their life to know Jesus. And so that's where I started getting really involved with serving. I realized this was an awesome way to allow people to connect with Jesus in their own way, to share what the relationship I had and allow them to grow as well. So started at Messiah with serving with them. I was very grateful for those opportunities, and then went on into my workplace. First worked at Hopkins in Baltimore, and realized when I walk into a room, that person that's in the bed is someone that Jesus loves, and that's my goal for the day, to make them know that. And that transferred on into the pediatric world. I worked at CHOP for the last 3 years in Philadelphia, the Children's Hospital there, and also got to walk alongside families through some really challenging journeys, often there with open arms and open hands for the moments where they just needed someone to pray for them, or to just stand next to them or give them a hug, whatever it might be. And that's, I think, where the journey starts for figuring out who Jesus is and how to have a relationship with him, is sharing the relationship you have.
Absolutely. And Matthias, how about for you?
So for me, I grew up in southern Germany. I studied business, and I've reflected a lot on what does it mean to have a secular skill set and training and job versus full-time ministry, right? And is there a way I can use my vocational training to serve, to volunteer, and even better to do it with my wife? So I really, truly, and strongly believe that we're not saved by good works. Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished," so we can't add anything to it. But I believe that we're saved for good works and to steward the talents and gifts that God has given us. So, and we had very different schedules before Mercy Ships. I had a travel job in sales. Joanna worked weekends and night shifts in the hospital. So we went from being like ships passing in the night to being stuck on the same ship.
And your story is very interesting. Just share briefly how the two of you met.
So we both happened to be at a wedding in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. My cousin got married. Joanna mistook me for an old acquaintance. So she ran up to me and gave me a big hug, only to realize it's a total stranger. And we got on like a house on fire and did long distance for a while. Wrote a book together, actually, and then got married in Germany.
Oh, my goodness. Tell us how this ministry is really strengthening your faith.
Yeah. That's a great question. There's many different ways, but for me, the biggest one is just giving me a greater picture of what the church is. I think I always saw it as a building and a structure of leaders who perform a Sunday service. But really, I'm learning that the church is the people who said, hey, I want to follow Jesus and I want to be his disciple and I want to do as he did and become like him. And being on Mercy Ships, I remember that first car ride from the airport to the boat to the ship, which is half the journey in of itself to get there. But we were there with a surgeon, a country director, someone working at our Hope Center, a videographer, just all these different roles, and no one was more important than anyone else. Everyone just came and took their seat at the table. No one's seat was higher than anyone else, and just brought what they had to offer. And that gave me a really beautiful picture of what the church is when it's unified and when it brings together just what the different parts of the body do. If the eye is seeing, then that's what the eye brings. So kind of that aspect is really what strengthened my faith working with Mercy Ships. Yeah.
For me, I'd say it really was living in a hospital, pretty much. I don't love hospitals. Back in the day, I was always glad when a visit to see a sick relative or friend was over. Weird smells, long, white, sterile corridors, weird names like radiology, anesthesiology. So living on a hospital ship, I had to get used to going down and visit patients, play games with them, read the Bible to them, and actually realize that God is with those patients, with those people in need. He never promised that we wouldn't face difficult times, but he did promise he would be Emmanuel, God with us. So my faith was really strengthened by seeing the resilience and faith that our patients have.
Yeah, how wonderful. Thank you both for being with us and sharing your journey with us. And to learn more about Mercy Ships, visit mercyships.org. Stay with us. We are back right after the break. Welcome back. Coming up tomorrow on Morning Light, we first introduced you to Life Cycles in March. The organization helps guide young people into the person God created them to be. We will share details about Life Cycles' upcoming rides. Plus, you will hear from 2 young people whose lives have been impacted by the program. That's a look at what's coming up tomorrow on Morning Light. Now, Jeff, your closing thoughts.
You're interviewing all the inspiring young people. Awesome work today, Deborah.
Thank you.
Well, it's our 249th Independence Week, and as 4th of Julys go, and in the American story, few are more dramatic than 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. That's a day when two of the authors, the second and the third presidents of the United States, died just 5 hours apart. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. Newspapers reported the timing of the deaths of these founding friends as an act of divine providence, not at all a coincidence. As they saw it, God was confirming his hand in the life of the Republic. The truth is, God cares about details. He cares about our birthdays and the day we die and all of the days in between. Remember, he knows the number of hairs on your head. If you're alive today, no matter how dark it feels, there's a reason to hope. Your mission isn't over. For Deborah and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for watching today. Go check on your neighbors, and we'll see you again, God willing, tomorrow morning.